the money started to run out, and I started doing some odd jobs around town. I worked for a demolition contractor for a short while, and tired of that, and I went to the unemployment office in town here, or the employment office, and my girlfriend, who was to become my wife, Gisela, um, she majored in social work at in college, so she immediately got a job at the YWCA as the adult programming director. I went in, and it's like I had to get a job somehow, so I kept going in, kept going in, kept going in every day, and I was first name basis with the guy behind the counter. What kind of jobs came in since yesterday? Well, here's the list. So one day I said, okay, well, give me the list of all of them. Let me go through. And I said, what's this? He says, what? I said, it's some place called the Fulton Opera House. I said, what's that? He says, oh, those rich people own it. And, they put on Annie Get Your Gun and, Showboat and, that kind of stuff there. And I said, well, what's this code for the job over here? He says, oh, they need a janitor. I said, okay. So I went down, knocked on the door. Somebody came. I said, I'm here about the job. Oh, you want to be the janitor? I said, yeah, all right, well, come upstairs for the interview. So I filled out the form, and they said, well, this is the first time we're ever going to have a janitor that's been to college. And I said, well, I know how to operate a vacuum cleaner and a mop, and I can pick up spilled popcorn and stuff like that. So I became janitor of the Fulton Opera House. And there was very little to do there. So I would hang out with the crew, helping them build stage sets, meeting the actors and actresses, and the theater's, is an absolute masterpiece. Just absolute beautiful, beautiful old world theater. So I figured if I was going to work somewhere, I might as well work in some place that was just absolutely gorgeous, which I did. So I'd make an appearance, and then I'd do all the work that I had to do, and then I'd slip out the back door and start walking around town looking at the buildings and architecture and all the stuff that was in here. And I'd go up to From the Mouth Down and hang out up there. So one day I went up there, and he goes, oh man, I'm glad you came here today. I said, what's up? He says, I got invited to join this band, and we have to leave next Wednesday to go on tour in Florida. Can you take my job here? The guys love you here. They've seen you around here enough, and I had retail experience and around working in those shops around the University of Maryland, and so yeah, they're supposed to come in this afternoon, so hang out. So I came in and said, hey man, I got to go on tour, and Steve will take my place here, and oh, okay. So I was just immediately hired that way, and I quit my job as janitor and came in and started learning the vintage clothing industry. After a while, Jim Rainier and Tom Feeser started doing interior design work, and they were doing a lot of bars and restaurants and things like that. Jim was an idea man, but he only knew how to hold things together with thumbtacks and scotch tape, whereas Tom Feeser knew how to operate power tools. So they made a very good team. So they were doing all of this work and weren't in the store very much at all, till finally Tom comes to me and says, hey, why don't you buy the business? And unbeknownst to him, I was out looking for another job because I was tired of refolding blue jeans in that store there. And I went this low. I went to like an Olin Mills type place to take portraits of children and stuff like that. And I showed him my photography work, some of the stuff I'd done. And the guy says, oh, great, you'll have a job, but one thing. I said, what's that? He says, you have to shave your mustache off. I said, why? Well, we've done surveys, and children don't like photographers with mustaches. They cry when they see them. I said, forget it. I said, I'm not going to shave my mustache to get this job, shove it. So I came back, and next thing I knew, the business was offered for sale to me. The word vintage, the word retro, any of that stuff had not been coined yet to describe this type of business. All it was used clothing. So the way that I described the customers at that time They were countercultural bohemians who would come in to wear this stuff because it was just so unusual to wear, but it was just great because the unique identity that everybody tried to have back in the 60s, you know, painting their faces with rainbows or, you know, braiding your hair or doing all this weird tie-dyeing and all of this stuff. Everybody was trying to look as individualistic as they could. So this fit right into the cultural movement for my generation, is wearing something that's one of a kind and sets you apart from the crowd. So I talked to my then wife, Gisela. We had gotten married by that point. And we decided, sure, why not? Let's give this a go. So she quit her job at the YWCA, and we jumped into this business with all 4 feet, right into the deep end. And we immediately had to learn how to swim. And there were no books, there was no internet, there was nothing that would teach you any of this stuff. So when I would go to auctions, and there'd be the little old lady sitting there on the stool while they were auctioning all the stuff off. I can't stand these winters anymore. I gotta move to Florida. That's where my son lives. He's a dentist down there. I'm gonna move to Miami. I don't need all this stuff. Well, you'd buy the box of clothing and you'd go, well, what can you tell me about this dress? Oh, that's the one I wore on my honeymoon in 1939, you know. And so I'd look at that and take a mental picture of 1939. I'd move on to the next auction. There'd be the other little old lady moving somewhere. Well, what can you tell me? Well, that's the one my sister wore at her graduation in 1923, you know. So I'd have to like, well, what's the difference between 1923 and 1939? So I started looking at all this stuff, and smoke was coming out of my ears because I couldn't figure this stuff out. So finally I wised up, and I started buying Sears and Montgomery Ward's catalogs, like old ones. And I'd go through and I'd look at the fashions in the Sears catalogs, you know. And so I got all these things chronologically set up. So when I'd go out and buy stuff and I'd pull the box out, I'd go, well, this sort of looks like something from the early 40s. And I go, and sure enough, you know, until finally, after looking at all this stuff and researching it in the Sears catalogs, I was able to pick something up and know when it was from, you know, just by the styling, the pattern on the fabrics, the buttons, the type of zipper, you know, like all of these things, all this construction of the garment would communicate to me when the piece of clothing was from. So that's how I taught myself all of that stuff.